I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is 6:01 p.m. and this is a special session of the Planning and Zoning Commission, January 22nd, 2025. Item number 1 is call the meeting to order. What about this roll call thing? That's new. Do we need to do that or? No. Okay. Item number 2 is the seat alternate to act if required. We have Commissioner Wallace with us this evening. Item number 3, hearing of residents. Anybody? Any emails or anything? Nope. All right. Item number 4 is our consent agenda. We have a single item. Item 4A are the minutes from the December 4th, 2024 regular meeting. There's no discussion on the consent agenda. Does this item need to be pulled for discussion? Anybody? All right, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay, Commissioner Wallace
Second.
and Commissioner Carbone. Give me a sec here. All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. There's no discussion. Please record your votes. All right, I see 5 votes. Can we publish that? Have 5 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. Item number 5 is a public hearing. The Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing related to zone change requests and replats within this agenda. The public hearing will be open to receive a report from staff, the applicant, the adjoining property owners affected by the applicant's request, and any other interested persons. Upon completion, the public hearing will be closed. The Commission will discuss and consider the application and may request additional information from staff or the applicant if required. After deliberation, the Commission is asked to consider and act upon the following requests and make a recommendation to the City Council if necessary. Item 5A, PL CPA 2025-0006. Hold a public hearing, consider, and make a recommendation to City Council on an amendment to the comprehensive plan to incorporate updated water and wastewater master plans. Kathy?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good evening. This presentation is much of a repeat of what we presented last time to the CIAC, but we're not talking about the CIP so much for impact fee updates, but we're actually talking about updating the master plans of water and wastewater for the city. So we're going to go over the land use assumptions again. I'm going to go pretty quickly, so feel free to stop me or ask questions at the end, whatever you're comfortable with. We're going to talk about the methodology for project identification and then have opportunity for questions.
All right, real quick, Kathy, I think because it's a public hearing, we'll have to hold our questions till it's our turn, okay?
Sounds good. Okay, so going over the land use assumptions for updates of the water and wastewater master plans. This presentation was prepared by our consultant, LAN. I'm using the same presentation, made a couple little tweaks to it, but for the most part, it's their product and what they put together. So the basis for the land use assumptions was the 2018 land use plan map. It was modified based on residential subdivision development information received from the city to our consultant in 2022. So the end of 2022 was really the baseline for all of the growth assumptions. It is assumed that developments that are in place will remain in place for the planning period used for these master plans. New growth will expand away from the city center as opposed to starting at the edges and moving in. And development pressure along 35 and from New Braunfels will result in development to the north. It did take into account the annexation agreements and the fact that most of the annexations did occur earlier this summer. So although we used 22 as the basis for the growth assumptions, we did add in the territories that were recently annexed. It assumes that the CCNs will remain the same, which they do get tweaked occasionally depending on development, but for the most part, it's assumed they remain the same. Let's see. Population projections were done and growth rates established for projection of an ultimate 2050 population of a little over 80,000. The distribution of that population was factored in. These maps kind of generally depict the distribution of population over the time between 2020 and 2050. Housing projections were also considered, increases in housing for each 5-year period between 2020 and 2050. The housing distribution, similar to the other exhibits, showing the higher density of housing over time. The methodology for project identification for these master plans was to evaluate the existing systems, model the future growth that we just talked about, and propose projects to solve the existing and future issues. So for the water master plan, we developed a water model inputting the pipes, valves, tanks, structures, etc. that's currently in our system. Updates were made to the model, including wholesale customer demands, actual residential usage patterns from Schertz data, pressure reducing valve settings, and removal of water lines that were actually in our GIS system but are no longer in service. Then the consultant evaluated the existing model against TCEQ's water rules and regulations, and we identified CIPs or projects that address that TCEQ criteria where there are shortfalls currently. So looking at the TCEQ public water system requirements, it talks about how much storage and supply must be provided based on population. Pumps must have certain high service capacity based on population also and number of customers. And there are minimum pressure requirements based on fire flows that has to be maintained within the system. So it was identified locations where there perhaps was a little bit of low pressure or pumps that maybe aren't meeting the capacity demands in order to meet those TCEQ requirements over time. So we evaluated the future water system by applying the growth patterns from the land use assumptions to that existing model, reevaluating the model against those TCEQ requirements again, and identify further projects that would satisfy any unmet TCEQ criteria for the future. So we've got two types of projects that are included in the master plan, and those are projects that we need because of identified deficiencies in the system today, and then also projects that are needed to meet that future growth. All right, so moving on to wastewater. Again, a model was created using, starting with our existing GIS data, all of our system, manholes, pipes, force mains, lift stations, those sorts of things. Then that model was calibrated based on flow monitoring that was done at different points in the system, and they were able to capture some rain events, and that's important because it actually allows them to see how much inflow and infiltration or stormwater is getting into our wastewater system. Shouldn't, in an ideal world, none of it gets in there, but it actually does in the real world, and so they were able to confirm and correlate what got in that they were able to monitor, also looking at rain gauges and rainfall data during the period that they were monitoring and measuring flow in the system, and how the model reacted to that. And then they adjust the model to make sure that it is actually depicting results that we are actually seeing in the real world. So they look for the model creating or indicating that we're having sanitary sewer overflows, which means there's not enough capacity in the system for all the flow that's going through it, whether that's wastewater or wastewater and stormwater that's getting. So they're looking for overflows, which is where the sewage actually comes out of manholes. Rarely happens here. The model does indicate that there are places that it expects it to happen. It's not really happening. But we need to address it. If the model says it's happening, we look very carefully and make sure that we're doing whatever we can to keep it from happening. Also surcharged gravity mains, which means there may be water backing up in a manhole and filling those pipes, not necessarily discharging at the surface, but filling up the gravity mains so it lowers the available capacity for more flow. They did find that there were approximately 26,000 feet of surcharged gravity mains and 21 projected overflows. So evaluating the future system, this is where they put the population projections, the growth projections into the model, apply it, and identify any future expected sewer overflows or surcharge lines, and identify projects developed to relieve those existing issues and future systems stresses, which could be from a capacity issue or those developing from growth. So again, we've got both types of projects in the master plans. We've got projects that maybe upsize a line that's currently under capacity where we may be having surcharges, and that would be needed even if there was no further growth, and also projects that are needed to provide capacity for the future growth. So, we'll talk about the master plan updates then. So, I'm using the same slides that we used last time to talk about development of the CIP, which is really focused on projects that are needed for growth. And it's important in the development of the CIP to say, okay, do we expect this to occur in the near term, in the 10-year planning process, or in the 30-year planning window, because it impacts when those costs can be calculated into impact fees. It's not so important for the master plan to identify when we expect projects to happen, but I'm using the same slides, so they're broken into near term, 2030 and 2050. But the fact is, it's one big list of projects on these master plans. So we've got both major infrastructure projects and waterline improvements. There's a listing here. There's a listing in the report that was in your packets. We've got, again, the 2030 water projects and the 2050 water projects. And the outcome of this is really, this is a graphic depiction of the updated water master plan. So it shows all the projects with their identifying numbers. So there's a description of those projects in the policy document that goes along with this map. The wastewater projects, we've got some major infrastructure and some improvement projects. And again, they're broken into near term, 2030 and 2050, not so important for the master plan, but they're all included on the master plan. And so here is the proposed updated wastewater master plan, again, with all the projects, regardless of when they're projected to be needed. So that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to go back to any other slides, but what we do request be done is a recommendation to City Council for adopting these master plans, and they will be part of the comprehensive plan as supplemental, similar to the master thoroughfare plan that we have.
All right, thank you, Kathy. It is 6:15, and at this time I'll open the floor for any public comment. Anyone wishing to address the commission on this topic? Nobody? Once? Twice? 3 times. All right, it is still 6:15. Public input is closed. Now, Commissioners, this is almost the same presentation that we saw 2 weeks ago, but I know, Ms. Brown, you weren't here So if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to do that. No? All right, so this is a recommendation to City Council to incorporate the updated water and wastewater master plans into the comprehensive plan. So would someone like to make a motion? We can approve, or we can deny, we can recommend approval, we can recommend denial. What? All right, quick.
There's a lot of projects ongoing right now that weren't directly into the CIP, but so some of the deficiencies that were mentioned in the CIP, like the ability to refill the live oak tank and low pressure on the south side and all that kind of stuff, are those things, have they been addressed, or will they be addressed in the near term? How's the water pressure on the south side? Is it good? Is it bad?
So it's better. There have been some improvements made. I don't know if you want to add anything in particular, but there have been some operational improvements made to help with the pressure there. We've also had some improvements because of the Corbett elevated storage tank, and the ground storage tank that supports that is under construction right now. So those should work. And I think we also have another project for the Ware Seguin tank improvements.
So the ground storage tank isn't finished yet, but, and there's a pump station along with that?
Yes.
Okay. And then did this CIP, did it take into account the second pipeline from Schertz again?
Yes. Oh, it's not. Right, because it's an SSLGC, but it does take into account that incoming water source.
Incoming water, that's what I meant.
Yes.
So it does take into account that. Okay.
Correct? Yeah.
Maybe to sort of chime in again, Commissioner Brote. So part of what we need is the plan, right? We know what are the big things we need to build. Part of adopting this into the comprehensive plan is that becomes the basis of our regulations and our ability to require developers to build some of this stuff as well, which all work to then now we have a plan. We know where we're headed to sort of solve and address those problems. It's really the next item, the impact fee item in the CIP is then how do we pay for that to get them actually built in a timely manner.
Anyone else? Well, we can take a minute. A lot of numbers, you know, a lot of projects, so. All right. Anybody else have questions or comments? Someone like to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to recommend approval of PLCPA 2025-0006.
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Commissioner Wallace and a second from Commissioner Carbone to recommend approval of PLCPA 2025-0006. Any further discussion? Please record your votes. All right, I see 5 votes. Can we publish that? We have 5 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. Thank you. All right, item number 6, requests and announcements. Request by commissioners to place items on a future planning and zoning agenda. Anyone have anything? No. Announcements by commissioners. Anything? Announcements by city staff. Nothing. What have you all been doing for the last month? Not, you know. All righty, moving right along. Item number 7, information available in the Planning and Zoning Commission packets. discussion to occur. You'll find a listing in there of our, the projects and items currently in front of City Council and their current status. Item number 8, it is 6:21, and there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. We'll take a couple-minute break here and reset for the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. Interrupt his conversation. We'll get him here when I gavel the thing. Good evening. It is 6:25, and this is a January 22nd, 2025 meeting of the Schertz Capital Improvement Advisory Committee. The Planning and Zoning Commissioners are joined by our additional representatives, Dr. Penshorn, Mr. Jones. Appreciate you all being here. Mr. Wallace is up here with us once again. Hearing of residents, anybody? Any written or internet or no? Okay. Item number 4, it's a public hearing. 4A, Hold a public hearing for a presentation, discussion, and possible action to approve a recommendation regarding an update to the City of Schertz water and wastewater land use assumptions, capital improvement plans, and impact fees to be assessed. Kathy?
Members for CIAC in addition to P&Z commissioners. So at the last CIAC meeting, we went through a lot of what we just went through in that P&Z meeting. We went through the development of the land use assumptions and the selection of projects that would go into the CIP. We're going to kind of shift gears instead of referring to this as a master plan. And remember, that plan included improvements that are needed in our system regardless of, even if growth stopped today, nobody else is coming to Schertz, we need some improvements. But we can't ask new development to pay for those improvements. So we're not just going to talk about the overall master plan, but we're going to talk about the CIP, which has those projects that are identified that have at least a portion needed because of the growth that's going to come. So we're going to talk about developing the costs for those projects, living unit equivalents, a credit analysis, I'll explain what that is, the maximum impact fees that were calculated, a local impact fee comparison, how do we stack up against other cities, and the next steps. So, developing the CIP costs. So, the consultant looked at a variety of cost data. They looked at calculating the inflation rate and what parts of the project costs are eligible for impact fee funding or to be included in the calculation of the maximum fees. So, cost data, a little bit here. Generally, a cost estimate gets closer and closer to actual understanding of what the cost is going to be the further along you get in development of a project. So if it's just spitballed, it's in the future, we don't know a whole lot about it, but we know it's going to be about a 5-mile long wastewater line, and we think it's going to be about 24-inch diameter, and it'll probably cost whatever it costs, $10 million. But we know very little about it, so we need to add a really large contingency to it because to account for, well, we were really far off. We didn't really understand that project. The better you understand the project, it's exactly 4.5 miles, and it's between 20 feet deep and 25 feet deep, and it's definitely a 24-inch diameter line, and we need this many manholes. Once you know those things, once the project is designed, you don't need as much contingency. You know pretty well how much it's going to cost. So the closer you get, and so they've got this different classification for each stage of a project development. And the projects here, for the most part, except the ones that are already underway, which we know exactly what they're costing because we've bid them out, we're paying for them right now. The ones that we don't know about, these kind of newer identified projects, are class 4. So those, I believe, have a 30% contingency added to them. The sources that our consultant used to come up with the project costs were TxDOT reports, RS Means database, cost estimates from past and current city projects. We did provide some data, and past and current projects that they've been involved in as a design firm. So again, they did add a 30% contingency factor, and that is on top of inflation rates applied because we only have class 4 estimates. It's very early in the planning stages. So for inflation rate calculation, there was a variety of sources used for that, and that's to accurately capture construction costs for not the near-term projects, because those are much more pinned down and they're current, so there's not nearly as big of an inflation issue that needs to be applied to those. But for 2030 projects and 2050 projects, annual expected inflation was calculated. RS Means historical indexes, Mortensen indexes, and Turner inflation indexes were consulted for a median yearly inflation rate over that time of 3.91%. Eligible project costs. So the Texas Local Government Code is very specific about impact fees or otherwise known as capital recovery fees, what can be included and which projects can be included. So here I'm going to mention, during the last presentation, we talked about the fact that the projects were slotted into different time periods. We don't expect that all the population growth is going to happen in the next 10 years. So we have to say, okay, which of these projects do we really need to accommodate the growth that's going to happen in the next 10 years? We're also going to look at the projects that are needed for the next 30 years because we can't tell for certain where the development's going to come. So we may project, okay, well, we need capacity down here in southern Schertz, so we're going to put, expect a project there, and then the growth actually happens in northern Schertz somewhere. So we want to look at projects in both because we don't know exactly where it'll be, but we know that the likelihood of the growth being a certain amount over 10 years could be either one of those places. But we can only use 10 years worth of growth. Hopefully that'll sort of come into focus a little bit more. We also looked at the percent utilization for projects so that we did actually look at some of the projects that are system improvements that we need regardless of whether growth comes, but they're also actually adding capacity. So some of those projects, a portion of those projects is eligible for impact fee funding and to be included in the calculation of the rate. So in the report, you may have seen there's however many 50 or 60 projects. There's a sheet for each project, and you'll see the little snippet here is kind of a snip out of that overall plan. And so each project is identified whether it's near term, 2030 or 2050. It's got a description of the project. It's got a justification. In this case, this one was a city-identified CIP. This is a line that's a 6-inch. It doesn't meet our current minimum standard. It also has some issues with leaking under the creek, where it crosses the creek. And so it does need to be upsized to a 12-inch, and that provides more capacity to serve some future growth, but also a portion of it is needed regardless of growth. So it's not 100% growth related, but a portion of it is. So there's a project sheet in the report for each one of the projects identified and a cost estimate that goes along with it. I guess that's a pretty important point. So this project, total expected cost, $763,000. It's fairly small. So then you'll see there are tables that have, this happens to be the near-term water CIP project table with the EOPC stands for Engineer's Opinion of Probable Cost. And so this project that we just looked at the sheet for, Bubbling Springs 6-inch water line replacement, $763,000, 27% of that is attributable to the expected new growth. And so for the impact fee calculation that's included, only 27% of the cost can be included in the calculation of the maximum fee. So you'll notice a lot of the near-term projects here, it's actually 0% of growth utilization. Another question that came up at the last meeting was, are we capturing the projects that were on the previous capital recovery plan that are currently being constructed or still need to be constructed? And for example, the Corbett pump station and 3 million gallon storage tank is one of those projects. It was included in a previous plan. It's being at least partially funded by impact fees that have been collected over the years past. So adding capacity, including the cost of that project as impact fee eligible. It's still here because we do have a little bit of a mashup between the master plan and the CIP for the impact fees. So you'll see we've got some lines down south, and we've got a line in FM 78 that are partly eligible to be included in the impact fee calculation. So Then we go on to the 2030 water projects. These are identified in order to meet the growth that's projected to happen by 2030. So all these projects are here along with the growth utilization. If it's 100%, that line is purely necessary because of expected future growth. So the entire amount of the project cost is included in the calculation. And then we've got the 2050 projects. We still have a cost estimate for them. We've got the description for them. They are not eligible to be included in the calculation for the impact fee, but what they are eligible for is to be funded by impact fees that are collected. Because again, we can't necessarily predict exactly which projects are going to be needed because it has to do with where development comes in and exactly what that development is. So we've got all these projects. We've done our best to project when we expect them to be needed, but we don't know for sure. So these projects can use impact fee funds that are collected, but again, the calculation could only include projects that are needed for the 2030 timeframe. Moving on to wastewater, same deal. Now, something that did happen between the last meeting and this meeting, and if you're looking at the dollar amounts for the rates, if you happen to look at the executive summary of the report that you got, you might notice that the maximum wastewater impact fee rate was, I did not write down what it was. It was 6,000 something. It's come down. Now it's only $5,556 because we made an error and we neglected to acknowledge that the Woman Hollering Creek project, which is under construction, almost finished, it was in the old plan. It was in the old plan for $9.6 million. So we've already collected impact fees for that. We can't now double dip and ask future folks who are coming in to pay for that also. But the total project cost is $13 million. So we brought the cost, the impact fee amount that's eligible down to $3.4 million. Also, it's not 100% for growth because there's already some growth that's currently being, not already some growth, development that's currently being served. So we've got Sedona, Crossvine, the package treatment plant that is treating their water. This line will take that offline. So again, we're not going to get new growth that's already there that's going to be served by this. So 74% of it is necessary for growth, but the other part of it is already there, either going to the package plant or pump and haul operations like Halley's Cove. So those are the near-term wastewater projects, the 2030 identified wastewater projects, and again, the 2050 projects. The projects are eligible to be funded by impact fees, but the cost of them is not included in the calculation of the maximum fee. Okay, now living unit equivalents. You may hear folks talk about LUEs. Sometimes they refer to them as EDUs, equivalent dwelling units. What it is a standard measure of consumption, use, generation, or discharge attributable to an individual unit of development calculated in accordance with generally accepted engineering or planning standards and based on historical data and trends applicable to the political subdivision in which the individual unit of development is located during the previous 10 years. So to make that long story short, it's what's equivalent to what a single family residential home uses for water or wastewater, generally as gallons per day. So an LUE is equivalent to one single family home. So if we want to put Schertz's growth in terms of LUEs, we have to equate that LUE to a residential meters usage. So residential homes almost always use a 5/8 inch water meter. And so that 5/8 inch water meter has a certain capacity. And that capacity is going to equal 1 LUE. So that's the basis for all of the calculations of the rates that will be charged to each different type of development. So for water LUEs, that's equivalent to 245 gallons per day. And for a wastewater LUE, 172 gallons per day. And again, remember, you use your water, some of it gets consumed, added into cooking, you drink it, you may water plants. Some folks have a separate irrigation meter, but generally, whatever comes out of the tap, whatever comes through the water meter, not all of it goes into the sewer. So, on average, 245 gallons per day is generally what is considered for one single-family residential use, and then 172 gallons per day for sewer being discharged from that same residential unit, which happens to be 75% of the water that is used. So the local government code also dictates that the maximum amount of fee that can be charged has to be decreased. There has to be a credit given to the amount of revenue that the new development will generate and pay for their water and wastewater. So in other words, they can't impact fee and then also pay rates that may go to the same projects. It's double dipping. Alternatively, we could just take that maximum rate, cut it in half, and say good enough. It seems kind of silly because we actually had a consultant do the calculation, and they came up with much, much less than 50% that needs to be reduced from the maximum amount. So they did the study. A copy of it is in the report. The revenue credit for water was $3.365 million, wastewater $4.611 million. So those have to be decreased from the cost of construction. So now we do the bottom line, kind of want to do a drum roll. Based on a total calculation and tallying of the impact fee eligible costs, minus that credit from the revenue generated from the new development, and divide that by the growth in LUEs. So in other words, here's how much it's going to cost us to build all this stuff that's going to be needed by the growth, and then here's how many units of growth we're going to have, and how much should each one of those units how much is each one of those units worth. So for water, that comes to $8,814, and for wastewater, $5,556. So those are the maximum allowable rates. You guys council can't say, well, I think we should really charge $10,000 for water, or we should maybe charge $6,000 per LUE for wastewater. It's not permitted by the local government code. These are calculated based on this very systematic process and scientific process that we went through to calculate these allowable rates. So once these are adopted, council can decide to charge less. They can decide to change what they're charging, but they can't, until we do another study and update this, they can't charge more than those rates. So in order to apply this fairly, we look at the capacity of the water meters. And so each water meter has a certain maximum flow rate, and that equates to a certain number of LUEs. So the 5/8 inch meter, remember I said that residential homes generally have a 5/8 inch meter. It has a capacity of 15 gallons per minute, so that is equal to 1 LUE. The 1 inch meter, it has a continuous flow rating of 30 gallons per minute, which is twice 15, so that's 2 LUEs. So this part is fairly simple math. You look at the flow rate of the meter, and that's the maximum amount that can go through the meter, and divide it by 15, which is the basis, 1 LUE, and that tells you how many LUEs are equivalent in that meter. So the maximum allowable rate that can be charged is that maximum amount, 8,814 for water and 5,556 for wastewater. And so on down the line. The number of LUEs times those numbers. So 2 LUEs times that 8,814, that's how you get the 17,627. So somebody comes in, they need a 1-inch meter because they're doing an activity that generates, that they need up to 30 gallons per minute, which is a lot of water, then this would be the maximum impact fee that we're allowed to charge. So to compare our fees with some other municipalities, we looked at a variety of municipalities, and these are arranged from most expensive to least expensive for the total, the water and the wastewater, and then also just to have an idea. Pflugerville, for example, well, we kind of know where that is, up north of Austin, around Round Rock, somewhere up there, but how big are they? I don't know. I'm not super familiar with Pflugerville, maybe you guys are, but in any case, they've got a population. When they did their study in 2023, their population was 65,000, and this is what their maximum rates, this is what they're charging actually for their impact fees. NBU is high also. Seguin in 2023 raised their fees quite a bit, so we fall under that if we chose to adopt the maximum rates. Saws, Austin, Bernie, San Marcos, our current rates are among the lowest. These are our current rates down here from 2011. So that's sort of where we fall. So I wanted to show the difference in what a common development would pay, what they would pay today under the current rates, and what they would pay if we adopt the maximum rates for water and wastewater. It's easy to see, it's easy to understand for the single family residents. It's much less sensical when we look at any of the other developments. Larry was helping me with this today, and this was incredibly difficult because you have to remember, not only does the rate per LUE change, but the technology of the meters has changed, and the way we have charged and determined the LUEs for wastewater has changed significantly. So, for example, if you look at a 2-inch domestic meter for a warehouse, they paid, let's see, their current, they paid $36,000. Two rates, if we chose to implement the maximum rates, and if they still needed a 2-inch meter, they would pay $239,000. So it looks wildly different, but these rates have needed to be updated for a while. It's taken quite a while to get through the process. And also, it's quite possible that if they came in today, because our meters technology that's being used has changed, they might only need a 1-inch meter. So I didn't try to get too cute and make a table that showed all those differences. So this is kind of, I kind of want to say this with a grain of salt, because it's really, I think, I said, oh, it's apples and oranges, and Larry said, it's apples and watermelons. So it's really very difficult, but at least it's almost like a worst case comparison. If you looked at, okay, 300 unit apartment complex, these numbers come right from the 1518 apartments that are being developed, getting ready to open down on 1518. 4-inch domestic meter, they paid $376,926. Under the new rates, maximum assessable, they would pay $958,000. So it is a significant difference. But what has been happening is the funds that we should be charging for new development, we're far undercharging. And so it's quite drastic. So now we get to the conversation that you all need to have about adopting a rate and the phase-in. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit so you'll have this conversation, and then you're going to make some comments that we will send to City Council, and got a draft of a letter. This is actually, I just took the old one from the roadway impact fee work that we did a few years back, and I just said, okay, just to show you guys, okay, this is what happens. You'll make your recommendations here, have your conversation, and then we'll boil it down. We put it actually in a letter. This is another local government code rule. We put these comments in a letter based on what you decide today, and your chair will sign it, and it will, on behalf of the committee, and it will get sent to City Council. And that will include the recommendation that they adopt the land use assumptions, the capital improvement plan, and whatever rates and any phase-in information. So, the rate adoption. I have a couple options here. This is just for conversation. This is not a recommendation from staff. What we're presenting, these maximum assessable rates, are what it would really take to fund the projects that we need for the growth that we expect to happen. They've been calculated. That part isn't really that debatable. But whether you think, well, we should charge that high amount, or that's too expensive, we can't expect development, we're going to scare off all the development, or it's just too much for folks to handle, we recommend something lower. That's your conversation. But I just wanted to put some things down here so you can be thinking along the lines of what would we recommend. So option A, adopt the maximum fees. We need the money, we're going to recommend adopting the maximum fees. Very simple. Option B might be adopt fees that are equal to a percentage of the maximum. So maybe we want to adopt fees that are 90% of the maximum, or 50% of the maximum. Or option C might be something else. So again, these fees represent what we believe through these studies it would cost to build the improvements that we need to serve the new development that's coming. If we don't charge those maximum amounts, that money still needs to come from somewhere. So we did have our financial consultant look at approximately how much would we need to raise water or wastewater rates, so the rates that everybody pays, not just new growth, but everybody who pays a water bill here in Schertz. How much would we have to raise those rates in order to compensate for what we're not going to make the new development pay? And the rough equivalency that he came up with is if you adopt maybe a 90% rate for the impact fee, the rates that all the citizens would pay would have to go up by 1%. So, and that's basically to pay the debt on bonds that would be issued in order to cover the costs. Did I get that generally right? Okay. I'm not finance, so I want to make sure I'm giving you the right information. So those are, something to think about. If the impact fee, if the new customers aren't paying when they're coming in and taking up capacity in the system, if they're not paying, somebody still has to pay. And generally that's going to be the ratepayers. So another thing we need to talk about is the phase-in of this. These are big jumps from the current rates to whatever's proposed here. Even if you decided to recommend notching it down a little bit and not going with the maximum rate, it's still a big jump from the current rate. So to sort of help soften the blow, you may recommend a grace period. So updated fees, we may say they wouldn't be effective until a complete building permit application submitted after October 1st, which is the beginning of the new fiscal year. I put that in gray because that's, like I said, not necessarily a recommendation that we're making, but we would, allow some sort of a grace period is probably a good idea. As far as a phase-in, perhaps, again, this is just an option. You'd want to say, okay, year one, first we decide when year one starts. So is it October 1st? Is it July 1st? When is it? So for the first year of that, folks would pay 50% of the max. Then the second year, it would go up to 75%, third year up to 100%. There may be other options that you might think of. And then again, we'll put it all together in a letter after the comments are made. Next steps, where do we go from here? We're having this follow-up meeting from our last CIAC meeting tonight. Tomorrow evening, we're going to have a conversation with the EDC to get some input from them. Yours is the formal comment that goes to City Council, but we want to kind of get a feel from the folks that have to deal with the developers that are coming in and getting these big impact fee bills. And so we're going to talk to them tomorrow, get a little bit of feedback. The final report will get submitted to council. We gave them the draft report that was provided with your packet the last time CIAC met. You have that final report now in your packet here. That packet has to go to City Council. Then we'll go to council, and because of the Texas Local Government Code having very strict regulations of exactly how the process goes, council has to have, they have to have a meeting, they have to pass an order, a resolution, setting a date for a public hearing. Then the public hearing has to be within so much, I think 60 days of when that date is set. Then there's a public hearing for them to actually consider and adopt the rates. And so at that first public hearing is when they would get the comments that you all will generate. And that is it for the presentation.
All right, thank you, Kathy. It is 10 p.m. and I'll open the floor for public comment. Anybody? Nobody. Okay. Let's see. Opened at 6:59. Closed at 6:59. Nobody spoke. All right, public input is closed. All right, time for discussion. If you don't mind me, I wrote down several things here. Kathy, on the charts where you showed the projects, particularly this is NTW9 and NTW10 or -10, W10.
Water or wastewater?
So back right there at the bottom. Those two both have the double asterisk, which means they're partially growth, and yet the growth is 0%.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. I cannot answer that question. That was provided by our consultant, and we see that there is 0% growth utilization during the 2020 to 2030 period.
Okay. Well, maybe the asterisks don't belong there. Maybe that was just a,
Go ahead.
Right, so wasn't that because of the fact that we only have so much growth needing capacity, and so it's 0%, but but that way it's still on the impact fee CIP, and thus credits are eligible for the construction.
That is true, thank you.
Could-
Yes, that is what it is. It's 0% growth utilization because it's not anticipated to address a growth issue in that location at this time.
Oh, okay. And then when we see the total cost, projected cost of the projects, that includes all three, the near term, the 2030s, and the 2050s.
So it does not include the 2050,
Okay.
just the near term
But
2030.
if a 2050 should pop into the 2030, then it's eligible for funding. It just hasn't
Correct.
been included in the calculations.
Correct.
2011,
A full update, yes.
okay. Well, it just seems to me, so that was 2011, it's now 2024, so that was 13 years, but we keep talking about 10-year increments, 2030, 2050, is,
Yes.
I mean, I don't think it really matters in terms of talking 2034 instead of 2030, but I'm curious why we are using in the calculations, in the LUE calculations, why we use the maximum meter flow versus an actual average usage. Because you folks do averaging every year for our sewer rates. So why do we, I guess the question where I'm going is, how many households actually use that 2,200 gallons or whatever is the most out of a 5/8 meter? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, for the average 5/8 meter, it continues to, so we include that as one LUE. And so when you get to the equivalency down below, right, and so we did the averaging for sewer, water,
I understand
the
that.
equivalency for sewer and water for the new meters, right? So the reason we're charging the maximum of the ones down below, because typically those are put on commercial developments, right? And so they size theirs based on the actual need, the need in the buildings. And so they can use up to the max of that meter, and so that's the impact they have to the system. So it's gonna vary some, right? So not everybody's gonna use the max, not everybody's gonna use the min. It's gonna be somewhere in the middle, but we size those meters appropriately. They size them per the building and per the use they expect, not based on an average building all the time, right? And so those maximums to develop the equivalency is the maximum continuous duty. And I'll tell you that on commercial develops a lot, there's a lot of back and forth on sizing, and frankly it's based on the fee. And so they come in and they want a much larger meter. They look at what the fee is, and they actually get down and calculate how much water are we actually going to use, and they put in the meter appropriate for actually what they are going to use. And so it is the max, you're right, but that's for the equivalency of those larger meters, because that's how much water they can use. That's right. And that's the impact to our system, and they use it.
Yeah, if they come in and they say, look, I'm going to go with the 3-inch meter, we need to assume we can provide capacity, we can provide flows, because they chose a 3-inch meter, right?
Well,
that's the reason
yeah.
why.
I understand that, Brian. I guess I'm more focused on the residential development, single family. Because, every year when you folks calculate, well, not you, but somebody calculates what I'm going to pay for wastewater service for the next year, they don't use the max capacity of my meter. They average over 3 months what I actually used, right?
That's how we charge the rates, yes.
So that was my question. Why don't we use that kind of data to calculate the impact fee?
It's a little bit the same way, right? So we sort of assume this is who do you want to have pay for this, right? So when we get new residents coming in and they've got that 5/8 cents meter, we don't necessarily run it to the max. We take sort of a modified rate. But the reason we don't ratchet it down further than that is because they haven't had that history. We haven't seen them come in and we haven't seen them say, look, I know I'm going to limit my usage. I know I'm going to limit my flows. And so again, it's who do you want to have pay for this? If you want to drop it down, we could.
Okay.
But to your point, we don't think it's an unfair way to do it. We again, for the 5/8, which is a typical residence, we've adjusted that to the flow we typically see, whereas the others, which are generally used for commercial, we assume the max, because the answer is if you've chosen that meter, not one smaller than that, I'm going to assume I've got to provide the capacity.
Okay, so when I look at this 5/8 meter, that 15 gallons per minute, that's not the max flow on that meter?
It is, but then we're kind of mixing that up with the 245 gallons per day that's the design number, that's the expectation for water use. And a lot of times if someone doesn't use 245 gallons per day, but the meter has that capacity, 15 gallons per minute. If you took 15 gallons per minute times how many minutes in a day, that's.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just trying to,
So we use the 15 gallons per minute as the equivalency, as the basis for one LUE.
because I know, as Brian just said, you know, we're talking about new users. And you really don't know what they're going to use, but certainly you can look across the city and you can find out what the median use is in a single-family residential, right? You could. Okay, enough said. We'll leave it there. And then our current rates are not at 100%, is that correct?
I believe they are at 100% from the 2011
Okay.
CIP.
The city is charged the maximum on water and sewer.
Okay, because I remember some discussion, but maybe that was the phase-in that I'm thinking of, where we didn't charge 100% right off the bat, did we?
That was the roadway impact fee.
Okay, roadway, all right. How about the figures you showed us for the other cities? Are those all 100% of their maximum? Do you know?
I
Okay.
don't know. I think those are their, I think those are their maximums.
Yeah, they probably, most people tend to charge them.
Yeah, but that's what they're actually charging. Whether it's the max or not, that's their current fee. Okay,
I believe so.
all right, thank you. Anybody else? Who's next? Richard?
So our current rates from 2011, they are 100%? Wow, okay.
Clayton, go ahead.
While he's working on that, so do you have a recommendation for this, or you're just putting the data out there and saying,
We're saying charge the max.
okay, with the phase-in?
With the phase-in, yeah. I mean, I think sort of with the city's kind of core values, do the right thing and do the best you can,
Yeah.
treat other people the way you want to be treated, work cooperatively as a team. It's problematic developments that are in the process that have done their pro forma to get hit with this big increase all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And so what we would tend to get, I think, too, just for kind of politically savvy reasons, is rather than have them fight this so stridently because of that impact, we'd rather go, that's fine, for both those reasons, we'll phase it in, but it gets me up to the max fee, and that is the benefit to our current ratepayers over the long term. Most beneficial is that I get up there and I start collecting and I keep up with the updates and I do that going forward. So yeah, I think we would recommend a phase-in similar to roadway that worked pretty well. The other thing that we're doing, just so y'all know, is we're presenting to the Economic Development Corporation tomorrow night, and our assumption will be, we're going to say to them, look, it's problematic for the current ratepayers to subsidize the commercial development, right, which is uses the other meters and has an increase. That's kind of what EDC's job is, to help make that stuff happen. And they can evaluate the benefit of a project specific and say, we're gonna, part of our incentive will be to cover more of it or cover less of it. So they can do it on a thoughtful, specific basis going forward. And I think that what we would say, again, just as a reminder, is this is one of many costs that goes into development. So, you know, you've got, for residential, you've got building permit fees, you've got roadway impact fees, you've got utility impact fees, you've got parkland dedication fees, you've got all of this stuff that goes into it from CCMA and SSLGC. And if council feels like overall those are too great and has a negative impact, then what we think council should do is, working with the appropriate boards, decide where we want to lower those, right? And not to pick on parks, but they may say, our water and sewer system is more critical, let's drop this back, let's drop that back, or something. To me, again, it's a way to make a thoughtful decision. If the overall is too high, let's not keep this one down because of that. Let's decide where we need to sort of save, would be our recommendation. So our recommendation is, go with the max, do a phase-in, something like this, and get us where we need to be. Again, somebody has to pay.
Mm-hmm.
It's how much of this do y'all want to pay as existing ratepayers versus you paid an impact fee at the time that was appropriate, or you've been paying your rates for years and years to get the system where it is today.
And this representative phase-in that we're looking at here, this concept, it can be different for water. Well, I guess what I'm really looking at is residential versus commercial, not water versus wastewater.
We would not recommend it be different for res and commercial. What we've seen is cities tend to do that a little more with roadway impact fees. They don't do that more with commercial. Again, what we would recommend, and you know, I think for valid reasons, is have EDC as part of their incentives on a project-by-project basis offset for commercial, which they do now, right? So would they get a project that comes in and that project is asking for incentives? Part of what EDC goes through and says is, well, what are your building permit fees to the city? What are your roadway impact fees for the city? What are your infrastructure construction costs? And then they say, what value to bring to the community? And that's how they assess it. We think that they will do that. You know, fortunately, our EDC is fairly well funded. So we think they've got the ability to do this, and it's not inconsistent with what they currently do. Now, likely what it's going to mean is they're going to fund at a bit higher rate, and we're going to have to step into some other areas. But I think one of the other advantages to this system is because of how we've laid out the infrastructure that's on the capital improvements program, those developers that are building the infrastructure will more often get a credit. So there are those benefits as well. You build some of this stuff, you'll get a credit for it. Under the old system, we didn't have a lot of infrastructure identified on the CIP, so they weren't getting credits, right? So think about roadways, which we're more familiar with. If a developer comes in and builds a section of system roadway, so the Saddlebrook development off Lower Seguin, they're making some improvements to Lower Seguin, they get roadway impact fee credits. That applies toward, offsets their roadway impact fee. Homestead the same way. Homestead Parkway and whatever the other one coming in, they get credits for those, and it lessens their fee. So this new system we're going to, there are more opportunities for people to get credit, as they should. That helps this as well, where in the past they didn't. They built the infrastructure, and generally it wasn't eligible, and they paid the fee on top of it.
Thank you.
Question for you, sir. Could you go back to the fees that we're actually paying right now?
Is that the one you're talking about?
So our current For one single family is almost 3,000, give or take, correct?
For water.
For water?
Yep.
Okay, now could you go to the one-year phase-in that you just had up? So 1 October of '25, it would go to 4,400,
Yep.
then 26, then 27.
Yeah, so 1 October is a 50% increase. It's not insubstantial, and then bump from there and bump from there. But what this does is, you know, we publish this, and everybody knows.
You beat me to my second question.
Yep.
So my second question would be, all the developers would know that this is going to happen in the 3 years.
Yep.
And so if I'm a developer, I know I'm probably going to want to try to beat some of these fees.
You will.
And so would that rush development?
So in my experience, and funny, our engineering consultant asked that today, so just keep in mind with this, what I have seen in my experience is you don't get a radically different development schedule, right? If a project's not viable today, they're not going to rush in and do it just because the impact fee is lower. What you tend to get is, I'd say it's about a 3-6 month window that they work to get their plat filed and some of their permit fees in to do that. And I will say we're fairly, we acknowledge that, right? So our building inspections department will know, hey, that fee goes up October 1st. Anybody in process, they will rush and work with them to get them through, in fairness, right? On that. So yeah, we put it out, everybody knows, but yeah, in my experience, if you're not ready to build that apartment complex, you're not going to build that apartment complex. And the same thing, you know, we talked about with incentives. If a commercial project doesn't make on its own, no amount of incentive is going to cause them to come in and build that thing. It really becomes, who's giving me more incentives, this city or this city, or how much can I get out of you, is what drives it.
One question I had, Brian, is with the huge jump that this is, I think it would create incentive to rush the development.
Yeah, I mean, talked to, I haven't gotten that impression, right? I mean, because it's, part of it too is the person who pays for this at the end of the day is the home buyer, right? It's not the developer. So the way, again, this system works is the developer of the project doesn't pay for it. The builder writes the check to pull the permit, but it's that future home buyer who buys it because it's baked into the cost of the house. Unless you're building your own house, unless you're walking on build my own house and pull a permit, pay these things, it's the future home buyer who pays it. And generally, if you're going out and getting a loan, you're rolling this into your loan document. So the problem with this stuff is, and as I said, it's not so much all the fees that go into it, right? And so you're paying, you know, at the end of the day, you're paying $1,400 in utility impact fees. You're paying another $3,000 in roadway impact fees. And again, we're going to kick that study off, and it's probably going to go up. You're paying $1,000 a lot in parkland, right? You've got whatever land development cost you've got tree mitigation that rolls in. It's that number that you start looking at going, building permit fees. What's a typical building permit fee on a single? The total fees? The total fees. About $1,500 for the building permit, right? So all of that adds up. You think, well, $1,500 is a lot, but it all stacks. That's what we tend to find. So yeah, we may get some folks rush it a bit, but I've not had any developer say, you know, I was thinking about doing this thing in a couple years, and we're going to push it forward. Because we've been telling folks that this is coming. So again, in my opinion, still I could be wrong. You'll get a 3-6 months rush up, but not a huge one, right? Because they've got whatever takedown schedule they've got. Fee's not gonna matter as much.
Well, what's running through my little pea brain right now, Brian, is trying to understand. So the developer does some kind of economic study of what it's going to cost him to put this development together, and then, so he's planning on selling a lot to a builder for X in order to recover his costs and make a profit.
Yep.
And I guess what I'm wondering is, now all of a sudden that lot, instead of costing, I don't know, $20,000, is now going to cost, well, I guess,
No, not quite, because it's not the developer who's paying for it.
but the builder, all right, let me
It's the
change
builder,
a little
yeah,
bit.
use the builder analogy, you
So
were there.
the builder, instead of having to sell a house for $350,000, he's going to have to sell it for $370 or $375 and
360, yeah.
$360. Okay. I guess what I'm going is that this isn't going to, if I've already got a project and I'm out there moving dirt and putting in pipes and cable and electricity, that this is really not going to affect me as the developer.
Well, it does
Harder to
to
sell
the,
to the
to the degree, right? So go back, so the developer is banking on the fact that he can sell these lots to a builder. The builder is banking on the fact that he can sell these lots to an end buyer, right? And so he's assuming how much, right? Economics, how much will somebody pay for this? And so in this case, right, we're going up about $10,000, $11,000 total. So the question is, will the consumer pay an extra $11,000 for that house? Right? That's the question. Because at some point, as much as you like it, you go in and you're like, oh yeah, I'll do this, do that, you tap out, right? It's just like with a car, right? And they try to upsell you, and you, that's all I can pay, and I can't pay any more than that. Part of why we look at, if you want to go back to the other cities, is this question of what's everyone else charging, right? Because one of the things that there would be concern about is, well, are we hurting ourselves because they're going to a different community, right? And that's what you worry about. I think that's where we look at this. If you look at Seguin, if you look at Saws, if you look at NBU, you know, that's why we stay. So NBU is that whole area north of us, right? And some of our residents are in NBU. Some of the properties we have are in NBU and are paying that. They're paying a much higher fee. And so what we would say is this is where it becomes a larger issue, and right? But it's a little bit, let me kind of go back, I'll offer this up, and Commissioner Howell, you'll love this one because we've had this discussion. Every time we pass development regulations, whether it's a fee or it's some other standard, that can add to the cost of a project. So we've had the debate over and over when we go, when we increase the design of streets, because our streets weren't holding up, that's an extra cost that rolls into that home price. When we say you gotta have a 10-foot side yard setback, not a 5-foot, that goes into the cost of the lot, right? So there are all of these things that stack on one another. But again, I think the problem is stuff's just getting more expensive. Now the developers would tell you land's getting more expensive. To buy raw land, that's getting more expensive too. So it's not just this fee, it's a bunch of stuff on top of it. But what we think is that the phase-in we've proposed is a fair fee that we think doesn't disrupt too much. Because NBU just went up on theirs. I mean, they made a huge leap, I believe, right off the bat that you saw in the media without much phase-in, you know, for the reasons they made. We tend to do it a little bit different. So yeah, I don't want to stand here and say it won't have an impact, but if it has too much of an impact, then I think we are all sitting down with council as a community to say, we've got a bigger problem, and how do we want to make that adjustment?
So I'd like to clarify again, and I don't know that we mentioned how the plat date
Okay, that's
is.
for maximum assessment.
Okay, so what council needs to do, what you'll recommend that they do, is that they adopt, they're gonna kind of do two things. They're gonna adopt the maximum assessable rate, which is what we've got here. And that will become effective immediately, right away. That is the maximum that they can charge to any property that records a plat after that day. That is the max. So anybody who goes in and records their plat the day after this all passes, they're locked in. So when City of Schertz in 25 years goes up to $50,000 for their impact fees, those folks that own properties that were platted that day in 2025, they're still maxed at the 14,000. City can never make them charge more unless their plat is amended.
Or state law
Or
changes.
replatted, or state law may change, right? But what council can do at any time is, even if they adopt this phase-in, they can go back and they can change that, and they can say, well, this phase-in is too much, it has totally stopped development, we're hearing from every corner of the city that this is a problem, we're gonna ratchet it back. They can do that anytime. Probably won't happen, but they have that power. Or if they say, we're not gonna listen to CIAC, they're nuts. We're only gonna charge 10% of the maximum allowable, and they change their minds in 2 months, they can go and change it again. So they'll first adopt what they, with your recommendation and their consideration, what they would like, and it's probably gonna be what is recommended. So the maximum rate, that'll be effective immediately. The phase-in, that can change.
Okay, I was that close to understanding it, and then you threw the curveball, okay?
Yeah,
Let me tell you where I'm confused now. We collect these impact fees at building permit.
Yep.
And so you were saying, let's say we decide to go, or council decides to go 100% on October 1st. But somebody's already filed their plat. So they pay the old fees?
yeah. So your, per state
Old
law,
maximum.
your maximum assessable fee is set at plat filing date,
Okay,
right? And that's what sets, and that carries forward. And so, however, the amount that's charged based on your plat can go anywhere to the max or less than that, right? So when we've got, Lisa can help me on this again if she looks up, when somebody walks in and they want to pull a building permit, if that property was platted 25, 30 years ago, we look through this schedule of chart to find they platted within this day, this is what their max assessable fee is.
okay. But didn't we put in place you come in and plat a subdivision, but you don't do anything with it? Doesn't that plat expire?
If you don't file it, if you don't come in with the final plat. But what we're talking about the situation is, so you've got a subdivision and you've got like one lot or 3 lots that didn't get built on. That's what we're talking about, right? Most times it happens in fairly short order. They build it out. But occasionally, and more often for commercial, you will find somebody plat property and it will not develop for 10 years, 15 years, and for whatever reason, somebody will then come in and pull a building permit, and that's when it triggers back to the plat filing date.
Okay, so
It's mostly commercial, less so res, but
so it's based on the final plat, not the preliminary
it's
plat?
the filing date, when you file that plat with the county.
The final plat?
Yep.
And you can't file that until you have the infrastructure in place?
So what we will not, let me back up and say this. So we do subdivision improvement agreements to let you file plats before acceptance of infrastructure. We have not, or we did not with roadway, allow people to do that solely to end run the impact fee schedule, right? But again, what we would say is I would treat them the same way. If I had somebody who walks in and goes, I got this commercial building I'm trying to build, I got this water line, I want to mobilize people at the same time, can you let me do that? we would let them do that still. We'd treat them the same way we have, but we would not allow people to come in and either prepay their fees or record their plat with the subdivision improvement agreement solely to beat, or let me say, staff would not recommend we do that to allow them to do that. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I think what you're telling, yes. If their sole reason, what the rules say is we won't approve, you can't record your final plat till all the infrastructure's in. And then you have, I don't want to call it a waiver, but you have a way of giving them a little leeway.
Right.
To where they can file it early. But you would not allow them to file it early just to avoid the impact fees.
And ultimately, it's council's decision. We would not recommend to council to do that,
Okay.
right? We would treat people the same way we have. So if I, like QT always does it generally. So if I get a QT that comes in and they say, hey, I'm ready to go, my building plans are ready, I need to build this water line though, and I want to mobilize at the same time, and it's going to take me 4 months to build that, but they're 2 months out from the update, we would do the same thing we did for everybody.
And the only reason I bring it up is because at final plat stage, they've got the water and the cable, electricity, all that's in, so they're ready to start pulling building permits.
Not all of that is in, but all of the city infrastructure is in.
Okay,
So the water, sewer, and streets are all in.
right.
They don't necessarily have the cable or the power, or,
But
they gotta have the
power,
street lights going
We did change the code so the power has to be in,
for the street lights.
Okay.
well, to record the plat.
Yes.
They have to have their
Yeah.
necessary infrastructure.
Well,
It doesn't include cable,
yeah.
but it
Yeah.
includes.
Okay, so they're not, I'm back to the question about rushing to get these things in before the new fees. That's gonna be kind of hard to do if it's,
I mean, what we're gonna get is we're gonna get somebody who's within about 2 months. They're gonna be chewing on their contractor, and
Yeah.
they're gonna be chewing on engineering inspection staff and public works inspection staff to accept the thing and get it done and not drag it out. That's what we really get. I would say we get that a lot now. There's a lot of chewing. You know, if you see Brian Timmons, he gets chewed on a lot for that reason, because every time is money, and the longer this thing delays, right, that's it. So we'll get more of that, but it is what it is.
If I
You know,
could
and
add-
that means I'll be sending a lot of emails to Kathy and Larry going, hey, we really need to get out there, really need to inspect this thing, da-da-da-da-da. Did we tell them they needed to do this?
If I could add to that, just to give you a reference, we just went through this in San Antonio, doing subdivision and the impact updates. So June was our deadline to have everything submitted, and in April and May, you had plats that were already close to finalizing what Brian's saying, pushed to get recorded. In terms of, you're not going to take something from the beginning to the end within 3 months. You know, if we're saying October, you're not going to be, it is very unlikely for you to come in today and say, I need to file this and get this going. It's stuff towards the end that's going to make that last push. So
it's the projects that are
basically
almost
done.
completed.
Correct.
Yeah.
They'll be pushed to get done.
And frankly, I'm going to say, we're going to push staff to get those done too,
And-
right? What I do not want to hear coming to you guys, coming to council is, look, we would have had this thing, but staff messed around and couldn't get out to inspect the thing for a week,
Yeah.
right, when it was ready to go. And then they had a whole bunch of punch list stuff that they hadn't said before. And it took me 2 weeks to do it, but then I couldn't get them out for another week. And at that point, I had missed it, right? That's what I can't have happen. So nobody's taking vacation the last couple weeks of September if they are part of the inspections process, right?
So, again, what I'm thinking of is old Weiderstein up here, where we had that, we've got that old subdivision that nothing ever happened with it.
Right.
And I thought that's why I don't know if it's the UDC or anyway, there was an ordinance that plats expired. If you didn't do something with them in a certain amount of time, they were voided. Yes, no?
Yes, yeah. So we have expiration dates on preliminary plats and
if they're
final plats, but not
Okay.
if they're recorded.
Right, so if someone came in with one of those lots in the Live Oak Hills subdivision and they constructed the infrastructure that's not there now, that's required.
Right.
Their fees would,
No, they're pre-87. so
they're
it's a little
pre-87,
Okay.
okay. This is
I
a
get it, yeah.
whole nother oddball.
understand.
Actually, then they would be assessed at the current rate because they're the whole,
yeah.
okay, never mind.
I don't know how many
Bad
individual.
example.
Yeah, I don't know.
But
how
if
many-
they had been platted in 2005,
Yeah,
then
okay,
they'd be paying the old rates.
good enough.
Again, like the Heritage Oaks, the one on the opposite side of
Opposite
Schertz Parkway,
side.
they're replatting,
Yeah,
so
Starts
they
fresh.
reset the new date on that replat.
right. Okay. I mean, I could keep beating on that, but I think I get the idea.
Yeah.
So it's not a big impact.
We think it's an impact, we think it's a fair impact, not sure how you do it otherwise, right? Otherwise, we stretch this thing out forever.
Right.
And
So
nobody
one,
pays
so
it.
one more. We talked about anything less than the maximum and the ratepayers have to pay part of it. The
That's
rates
right.
go up.
And the
So-
ratepayers are already going to eat some of this with this phase-in, right?
Well, that's where I was going. So if
Yeah.
we decide to do a phase-in, at least for those first couple of years, the ratepayers will
Yeah.
be subsidizing.
Yeah.
So if we recommend anything other than 100% right now, it's going to affect the current ratepayers.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know, Richard disappeared. Well, let's see, what else can we talk about?
Just trying to pull a permit
Yeah,
right now, I think,
you'll be
before.
right back.
So, I'm going to clarify, so if the
So
new
is your head
fees
hurt
are
yet down there, John?
adopted by council, I'm making dates up in March.
All right,
Final plat is reported.
Yeah,
April,
and they go the phase-in.
then they're on the phase-in,
Mm-hmm.
but they're under the new maximum still, okay.
well, we
So there
do,
won't
and
be a
that's
rush
a
of
fact,
plats
but
because the
I really hate to pull a vote when I know somebody's here, unless he's off the dais on purpose for some reason. So,
Let's see if he's on the phone or something, just make sure he's okay. No, yeah, I mean, I assume he's.
all right, well. Let's see, just run down my questions here real quick, make sure I understand what's going on, when it's going to go into effect. So when we make our recommendation to city council, we're going to recommend an effective date, correct? Or can we just leave that up to?
So what we would tend to say, what you're going to do is you recommend the
You bring that
approval of
letter,
the,
that letter up
yeah,
that you
it's the land use assumptions.
gonna want me to
it's the
sign.
CIP.
So is there anything in there about an effective date? I don't,
I don't think we typically had the effective
Effective
date
date.
in, right? You would recommend approval to the max fee with a phase-in,
yeah,
and that would be it. But the effective date is generally, right, you could say delay the effective date. Well, we would say at whatever point council hits it as staff's recommendation.
okay. So I guess then well, we could delay them, right? If we want to recommend you don't start year one until 1 October, we can do that.
You could say, look, we don't want the effective date for the maximum accessible to be till October 1. That would not be what staff would say, because we think the phase-in covers you for it.
Okay, so if then it really becomes, it really then becomes whenever council approves, whatever council approves, that's when it goes
really
into
is it,
effect.
yeah.
Okay. So we can recommend 100%. We could recommend something less than 100%. We could recommend a phase-in. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if somebody's going to make a motion, we need to know, we need to recommend the percentage, whether it's 100% or something less. And then whether we want it all right now or whether we want to phase it in. Does that sound about right?
And then the land use assumptions in the CIP. So
And the
we
land
adopt the
u-
land use assumptions in the CIP as presented by staff. Again, I'm going to offer this, that you adopt the maximum assessable rate
As presented.
as presented, and that we adopt a phase-in as presented by staff.
Okay. If
I
we,
haven't heard anybody object to that, and so but you can do what you want to do.
if we want to do the maximum,
Right,
right, that's what you got, yeah.
yeah,
But we can recommend something less.
you could.
All right, so land use assumptions,
CIP,
maximum,
We just do that? The land use
you
stuff?
did the master plan.
but that for the
Which is,
master plan.
which is included in the master plan, right?
It's a different document.
Yeah. So land use assumptions, and then if we want whatever value of the, what are you saying about, oh,
You do the land use assumptions.
yeah,
The impact fee CIP,
okay,
and then you set the maximum fee, and then whether or not to do a phase-in, or generally what that phase-in is.
So you will recommend that they adopt the maximum accessible,
They can choose to do what they want to do. They don't have to.
but they have to set that.
Yes.
yeah, so what I'm looking at, again, and I'm sorry to keep going over this, I just like to do it correctly. So I'm seeing that the motion, the recommendation needs at least three. The land use assumptions, the capital improvement plan, and then
The maximum
whatever,
assessment
yeah,
fee.
whatever we suggest the max fee be, whether that's the max or 50% of the max or whatever. And then the fourth one would be if we want to do a phase.
And what you want that to be charged at, right? So let me try again. Land use assumptions,
If I could, I think I've got it down.
All right, give it a try.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of the City of Schertz water and wastewater land use assumptions, capital improvement plans as presented by staff, the maximum impact fees as presented by staff, and the 3-year phase-in as presented by staff to be effective on a date determined by City Council. There you go.
Did he nail it? Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just making work for everybody. He had it all figured out down there already.
but it's also good to tell developers, they thought about this a lot. There's a positive to that. They didn't just,
All right. I'm not going to try to repeat that. I have a motion from Mr. Wallace and a second from Ms. Brown to recommend City Council adopt the land use assumptions as presented by staff, the comprehensive or the capital improvement plan as presented by staff, the maximum impact fee as presented by staff, and the phase-in schedule as presented by staff. Is it? With city? Okay. Got it. Anybody else? Richard?
Apologies for having to walk out again, but what was the phase-in schedule again? Just October 1st?
Date was whatever City Council wants to set, if they want.
When I initially saw this, I was wondering how much are we going to lose by going 50% in the first year? So we're going to do 50% on October 1st for a year, and then we're going to go to 75, and then we're going to go to 100.
so it's a little hard to estimate, because again, I think you had stepped out, the maximum assessable fee is set at the plat filing date.
Yeah, I understand all that.
And so-
I'm just, it's just kind of a rhetorical question. How much are we going to lose? Because
Well, I don't know.
When is the year 3 going to take effect? Is that going to be 25, 26, 27?
Well, see, under the motion that's that's been made, that effective date would be determined by city council. I think it was Brian was saying it's typically when they approve it. It's whatever date they approve it on, but they could set a different date. And then the question was asked, yes, during those first 2 years, current ratepayers will be subsidizing at some point the improvements plan, correct?
That's right. But again,
But I don't know if they can tell you.
I got all that.
Okay,
But what I'm getting at is you look at what Pflugerville is, you look at what NBU did, and if I read the news correctly, NBU raised their rates to 25,000 for the purposes of stalling development. I don't think it's working. It's going to happen. Seguin is up above where we are, and there's no problem with development in Seguin. I don't know if they have a phase-in schedule or not, but nobody's not going to Seguin. Saws has too much money anyway. They got other sources of money, so does Austin. And everybody else down there, they're probably going to raise their rates too. So I don't think we need such a generous phase-in schedule. I think we just, maybe in October go 75 and then 100 the next year. But I think we just need to raise it up and start collecting money because these things are going to cost a lot of money. And I think, like I mentioned last time, just as a big construction project, the South plant was supposed to cost $4 million. It ended up costing close to 10. The first expansion is going to cost close to 40. Construction has gone up. We're going to be paying tons of money. You guys got a lot on your plate between near term and 2030. There's a lot of stuff on there. And I know you have estimates in here and you have a little fluff in it, but it's still a lot of money. I'd prefer just to start collecting as soon as we can. So I don't really care for a 3-year phase-in. I'd like to go something sooner. But if the motion stays as it is, it stays as it is.
all right. Okay, so one more time. So the motion before the committee right now is basically what you see on the screen there, or did see. Thank you. With the exception of the effective date, that will be determined by, is to be determined by city council, correct? Okay, and we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, so, and I vote at this point, what? Huh? No. Okay. I'm going to tie them to their chairs, is what I'm going to do. Okay, so an I vote at this point is to recommend what you see on your screen with the exception of the effective date. So please record your vote. What?
Oh, yeah, now
Aye.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, never mind. Yeah, I can't use the machine. All right, so let's start down here. Dr. Penshorn?
Aye.
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 No.
Aye. So 1, 2, 3. So that's 6 ayes, 1 opposed. Motion passes.
and just to be clear, for the record, it's, as I understand, your no vote was because you want a shorter phase-in to go up more quickly.
Yes.
Okay. It's a help to have the no as reason that we council.
City council could make that determination.
City council can do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, all we're doing this evening is we're just making this recommendation. City council is the final, it's like a zoning and things like that. They'll make the final decision.
But again, helpful for them to know was he wanted a faster phase-in as
Right,
opposed
not
to
that he was, yes.
The rates are too high.
rates are too high.
And thank you for the fact that we don't use the electronic. I forgot all about that, so thank you. All right, it is 7:50 PM, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.